outside the Harrogate Hotel on East 52nd Street. A young black woman in a gray cleaning uniform was pushing a laundry cart through the service entrance when the general manager grabbed her arm. Not the sleeve, the arm. Nadia Ose was 26 years old, and the general manager of the Harrogate had never once said her name correctly in 11 months of employment. He called her Nadia when her name was Nadia, and she had stopped correcting him after the third week because she understood, the way you understand certain things without being told, that the mispronunciation was not accidental. His name was Vincent Callow. He had been general manager of the Harrogate for 7 years. The hotel had 4 stars, a rooftop bar that charged $32 for a cocktail, and a reputation for discretion that had been earning the Harrogate a specific kind of clientele for a very long time. Vincent Callow grabbed Nadia's arm outside the service entrance at 8:43 in the morning, and he said, loud enough for the 2 other housekeepers and the loading dock attendant to hear, "Get this cart out of the main corridor. I don't care if the freight elevator is broken. You people find another way. You're embarrassing the property." Nadia did not move. She looked at his hand on her arm. She looked at it the way a person looks at something that has made a very serious mistake. She said quietly, "Mr. Callow, please let go of my arm." He didn't. She said it again. Same tone, same volume. The tone of someone who has been trained to say things twice before she stops asking. Vincent Callow said something else then. Something about her attitude. Something about whether she understood how easy it was to file a performance review. He still had her arm. What happened next took less than 2 seconds. The loading dock attendant, a 50-year-old man named Gerald, who had worked that dock for 19 years, would later describe it to his wife as the quietest thing he had ever seen do that much damage. Nadia Ose removed Vincent Callow's hand from her arm. She did it the way someone removes a hand who has been taught, in a formal setting, exactly how to remove a hand. There was no drama in it. There was no anger in it. His wrist went one direction and his elbow went another, and Vincent Callow made a sound that was not words and stepped back 2 full paces. He did not fall. She had not tried to make him fall. She looked at him. Her face was very still. She said, "I'd like to finish my shift." Then she turned her cart around and went back through the service entrance. Gerald watched her go. He had not said a word. He would spend the rest of the morning thinking about the fact that he had not said a word. It would bother him in a way that the rest of the day could not shake loose. I'm Colin Covers, and I want to be honest with you, from the start. When I first heard this story, I thought it was the kind of thing that gets exaggerated in the retelling. A hotel maid, a general manager, a wrist. I thought someone had added details. I thought the ending was too clean. I have been doing this long enough to know that the stories that feel too clean are usually the ones nobody cleaned up at all. They're just the truth, still in its original packaging. So stay with me, because this one goes somewhere I did not see coming, and I have been writing about this city for 15 years. To understand what happened on that loading dock, you have to understand 2 mornings that started in the same zip code and did not know about each other yet. Vincent Callow woke up at 6:15 in his apartment on Park Avenue South. He had a standing appointment at a blowout bar at 7. His assistant had already confirmed his 11 o'clock with the hotel's ownership group, the Harrogate being in the early stages of a sale to a private equity firm called Meridian Hospitality Partners. The sale, if it closed, would come with a retention bonus for senior management. The number on the table for Vincent Callow, personally, was $430,000. He had been thinking about this number every morning for 3 weeks. He had been thinking about it the way people think about something when they are afraid it might disappear. He drank his coffee. He read the Post. He told himself that the Harrogate's Q3 occupancy numbers, which he had prepared for the ownership meeting, were accurate. He had told himself this so many times in the last 72 hours that the telling had started to feel like a ritual. The way you say something before you go to sleep that you know might not be true by morning. 12 blocks south and 6 floors up, in a one-bedroom apartment above a Vietnamese restaurant on 40th Street, Nadia Ose was awake at 5. She had been awake since 4:40, but she had stayed in bed until 5 because she'd learned in another life that the body needs the rest, even when the mind refuses it. She made coffee. She laid her uniform out on the back of the chair. She looked at the small wooden shelf above the kitchen table where she kept 3 things: a photograph, a folded letter on government letterhead, and a challenge coin from the 75th Ranger Regiment, worn smooth on the raised side from 11 years of handling. Her father had carried that coin for 23 years. He gave it to her the day she shipped out for the first time. He had said, "Your grandfather kept his in his left breast pocket for 40 years, and he came home every time." She had kept it in her left breast pocket for 4 deployments. She had come home every time. Her father had not come home from the work he did after the military, the civilian kind, the kind that looks safer from the outside. Marcus Ose had spent 17 years after his service working as a hotel industry compliance auditor. He audited labor practices, wage documentation, tip pooling records, and what the industry called occupancy narrative reporting, which was a phrase that meant telling the truth about how many rooms you actually sold at what actual rates to actual guests. Marcus Ose had been very good at finding the places where the narrative and the truth diverged. He had been auditing the Harrogate's labor documentation 18 months ago, when he was terminated by the firm that contracted him, a firm called Consolidated Audit Services, on the grounds of conflict of interest. The conflict was never specified in the termination letter. He had been dead for 14 months. The official cause was cardiac event, ruled natural, no investigation opened. Nadia had been back from her last deployment for 11 months when he died. She had taken the housekeeping job at the Harrogate 3 months after that, and she had not told anyone at the hotel her last name meant anything to her beyond what was printed on her name tag. She drank her coffee. She kissed 2 fingers and touched the photograph. She put on her uniform. She went to work. Now, stop right there. Before we get to what happened after that loading dock, I need you to understand something. Nadia Ose had 206 hours of Ranger School. She had done 4 combat rotations. She had been in rooms where the people across from her had weapons and intent, and she had come out of every one of those rooms because she understood the difference between the moment to move and the moment to wait. She had been waiting for 11 months. The thing that Vincent Callow did not understand, standing on his own loading dock at 8:43 in the morning, was that the woman he had just grabbed was not having a bad day. She was having the last day of a very long plan. Nadia finished her shift. She clocked out at 4:17. She walked to the 6 train. She went home. She ate dinner alone. She called her aunt in Baltimore, who was the only person left who called her baby and meant it, and she talked for 40 minutes about nothing important. Her aunt asked if she was eating. Nadia said yes. Her aunt said, "You sound tired." Nadia said, "I'm okay." Her aunt said okay and waited the way people wait when they know okay is not the whole answer. Nadia said, "I think next week is going to be a big week." Her aunt said, "Baby, do you need me to come up there?" Nadia said, "Not yet." "But maybe the week after." She hung up. She went to the small desk in the corner of her bedroom. She opened the lower drawer and took out a green folder. The folder was thick. It had been assembled over 11 months of careful, quiet, after-shift work. Every Wednesday, she had photographed something. Every Friday, she had cross-referenced something else. She had used the public access terminals at the Midtown branch of the New York Public Library because her father had taught her when she was 8 years old that libraries are the one place that belongs to everyone equally, and therefore the one place the people with money cannot fully own. Inside the folder was a series of documents that individually proved very little. Together, They told a story about the Harrogate's occupancy figures that was different from the story in the Q3 report that was currently sitting on the table in front of the Meridian Hospitality Partners acquisition team. The difference was not small. The difference was, in aggregate, approximately $12 million in misrepresented revenue spread across 22 months. Nadia's father had flagged the original discrepancy in a memo dated 19 months ago. The memo was addressed to his supervisor at Consolidated Audit Services. The memo was never forwarded. Her father was terminated 3 weeks later. 6 months after that, a cardiac event at 2 in the afternoon at his desk in a studio apartment in Queens, and a police report that noted no suspicious circumstances and closed in 48 hours. Nadia had spent 11 months building the case her father never got to file. She closed the folder. She put it back in the drawer. She went to bed. She did not sleep well, but that was not new. The next morning, she called a number she had been saving in her phone for 4 months under the name T. The contact's full name was Therese Mallory. Therese Mallory covered the hospitality and real estate beat for a publication called the City Finance Ledger, which was not glamorous and was not famous, and had been publishing accurate, sourced, deeply irritating financial investigative journalism for 21 years without anyone outside a specific set of industries paying much attention. Nadia had first emailed Therese Mallory from a library terminal 7 months ago. She had not given her name. She had said only that she had documentation related to a pending hotel acquisition and that her father was Marcus Osei, and that Therese Mallory had run a single paragraph in a footnote of a broader piece about Consolidated Audit Services labor audit practices 14 months ago that mentioned a terminated auditor whose name was not printed. Therese Mallory had responded in 6 hours. She had said, "I remember that paragraph. I always wondered why I couldn't print the name." They had been meeting every other Thursday at a coffee shop on 45th Street for 6 months. Nadia called the number. Therese picked up on the second ring and said, "I got the filing alert. It went live this morning." Nadia said, "How long do we have?" Therese said, "The acquisition is scheduled to close in 11 days. Nadia said, "I need 2 things from you. I need you to be at the Harrogate service entrance at 8:30 tomorrow morning. And I need you to have already called the Department of Labor's Office of the Inspector General before you get there." Therese was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Nadia, are you sure about tomorrow?" Nadia said, "Vincent Callow grabbed my arm on a loading dock yesterday in front of 3 witnesses. That's what happened yesterday. Tomorrow is what I planned." Therese said, "Okay, 8:30. Nadia said, "Bring a recorder." She hung up. She looked at the challenge coin on the shelf. She thought about her father sitting at a desk in a studio apartment in Queens, alone, with a memo that was never going to be forwarded. She thought about how a cardiac event at 2 in the afternoon at a desk with no history of heart disease in a man who had run 5 miles every morning for 30 years closes in 48 hours if nobody asks the right questions. She thought about the right questions. She went to sleep. She woke at 4:40. She stayed in bed until 5. She put on her uniform. The service entrance of the Harrogate Hotel at 8:30 on a Thursday morning is not a place where anyone expects anything to happen. It is a place for carts and deliveries, and the specific invisible labor that makes a 4-star hotel look like nothing requires any effort. The doorman on the main entrance had once told Nadia, during a smoke break she didn't take because she didn't smoke, but stood through anyway because he needed someone to stand there, that the secret of a hotel like this is that the guests never see the work. They just see the result. He had said it like a compliment. Nadia had thought about that sentence for 3 days. At 8:22, she arrived through the service entrance with her cart. Gerald was at the dock. He looked at her without saying anything. Then he said, "Morning." She said, "Morning, Gerald." He said, "You okay?" She said, "Yes. Thank you for asking." He nodded. He went back to his clipboard. But he stayed where he was, which was closer to the entrance than his usual spot, and he kept the clipboard in his hand without writing anything on it. At 8:31, a woman in a dark coat with a leather notebook and a small recorder arrived at the service entrance. She did not come to Gerald. She came to Nadia. She said, "Hi." Nadia said, "Hi, thank you for coming." The woman said, "Of course." At 8:47, Vincent Callow came through the interior door that connected the service corridor to the main staff area. He was on his way to his 9 o'clock when he saw the woman with the notebook. He stopped. He looked at Nadia. He looked at the woman. He looked at the recorder in the woman's hand. The light on the recorder was red. He said, "What is this?" Nadia said, "Good morning, Mr. Callow." He said, "Who is this person? What is she doing here?" "This is a restricted access." The woman said, "Therese Mallory, City Finance Ledger. I'm here to ask you about the Harrogate's Q3 and Q4 2024 occupancy filings, specifically the variance between the figures submitted to Meridian Hospitality Partners and the actual room night data as documented in your property management system." Vincent Callow's mouth opened, closed. Therese said, "We have documentation showing a discrepancy of approximately $12 million across 22 months. We also have a copy of the compliance memo filed by Marcus Osei with Consolidated Audit Services in October of 2023, which was never forwarded and which was followed by Mr. Osei's termination 3 weeks later." Callow looked at Nadia. Nadia said nothing. Callow said, "I don't know who you think." Nadia said, "Marcus Osei was my father, Mr. Callow." The service corridor was very quiet. Gerald had not moved from his spot near the entrance. Callow said, in a voice that had shifted registers entirely, "This is not the place to discuss." Nadia reached into the front pocket of her uniform and took out a folded piece of paper. She held it out. She said, "This is the account number and branch information for a safe deposit box at a Chase branch in Astoria, Queens. The box contains my father's original work files, his documentation of the discrepancy, and a draft 8K disclosure he was preparing to file when he was terminated. My aunt has the key. She is prepared to deliver the contents to the Department of Labor's Office of Inspector General at 11 o'clock this morning, unless you would like to discuss another arrangement." Callow stared at the paper. He did not take it. Nadia kept holding it out. She was not angry. That is the thing that Gerald would tell his wife that evening, and that Gerald's wife would repeat to her sister, and that her sister would write about in a message to a cousin in Charlotte. The way important, true things travel before they become public. The girl was not angry. She was very, very still, like she had been still before, and knew exactly how long it lasted. Callow said, "You are making a serious mistake." Nadia said, "I am a veteran of 4 combat deployments, Mr. Callow. I understand the difference between a mistake and a decision." He tried one more time, the way men try when they are used to being the last word in a room. He said, "Listen, whatever your father thought he found, he didn't understand the full picture. These things are complicated. Revenue recognition is," Nadia said. "My father had a master's degree in forensic accounting and 17 years of audit experience." He understood the picture. She paused. She said, "The question is whether you want to be the person who called the Department of Labor first, or the person they called second." Okay, I'm stopping here for a second, because I've been writing about corporate accountability for 15 years, and I want to tell you something. The people who build these systems, the revenue misrepresentation, the buried memos, the quiet terminations, they build them because they believe the people on the receiving end don't have the language, the access, or the patience to dismantle them. They believe the cost of dismantling is too high. They believe it personally. They believe it the way Vincent Callow believed it when he grabbed a housekeeper's arm on a loading dock the morning before and called it attitude management. He was not wrong about most people. He was wrong about this one. And the thing that makes this particular kind of wrong so expensive is that it compounds. Because Nadia Osei had not been working alone. She had been working the way her father worked, which was carefully, and with documentation, and without announcing herself until the documentation was complete. This is the part where it always goes one of two ways. Callow said, "I need to make a call." Nadia said, "You have until 10:30. He went inside. Therese looked at Nadia. She said quietly, "Are you okay?" Nadia said, "Ask me at 11. At 9:53, Vincent Callow called the Harrogate's general counsel from his office on the second floor. At 10:12, the general counsel called the outside law firm that represented Meridian Hospitality Partners on the acquisition. At 10:19, Meridian Hospitality Partners issued an internal hold on the acquisition closing. The hold was not announced. The hold was not public. But Therese Mallory had a source at the law firm who texted her the word pause at 10:21, and Therese had been doing this long enough to know what pause meant in the context of a $12 million discrepancy and a pending acquisition. At 10:44, Vincent Callow came back to the service entrance. He was alone. He did not have a lawyer with him, which meant either his lawyer had told him to say nothing, and he had decided not to listen, or his lawyer had told him to go back and assess the situation, and he was here to assess. He looked at Nadia. He said, "What do you want?" Nadia looked at him. She said, "I want my father's name in the compliance record that was never filed. I want Consolidated Audit Services to issue a corrected terminations notice reflecting that his contract was ended in response to a protected disclosure and not for cause. I want the Department of Labor to have every document in that safe deposit box by the end of the business day, and I want you to be the one who delivers them." Callow said, "And if I do that?" Nadia said, "Then the story Therese writes is about a hotel executive who cooperated with a regulatory disclosure. That's a different story than the one she writes if the documents go to the Inspector General at 11 without your cooperation." She was not offering him a way out. She was offering him a choice of doors, and both of them led to the same room, but one of them let him walk in upright. Callow said, "And your father. You think this fixes that?" Nadia said no. She said it without hesitation, without grief in her voice, though the grief was there. She had just learned, over 11 months, to carry it in a different pocket. She said, "My father drove to work every morning for 17 years, and he did not stop at a corner to decide if it was worth it. He already knew it was worth it. I'm not here to fix that. I'm here to finish what he started." Callow was quiet for a long moment. Gerald at the dock entrance had not moved in 40 minutes. Callow looked at the folded paper Nadia was still holding. He reached out. He took it. His hand was not shaking the way Vincent Callow's hands were supposed to shake. He had the hand of a man who had spent 20 years being the one in the room who did not shake. But the paper moved when he took it, and that was not the wind. At 11:17, Vincent Callow arrived at the Department of Labor's office of the Inspector General office in Lower Manhattan. He was not accompanied by counsel. He had called ahead. He had used the name Marcus Osei on the phone, and the person who answered had said, "We've been expecting this call. A referral came in this morning. Please come in." The referral had come from Therese Mallory, who had filed her initial information at 9:02 before she ever walked to the service entrance, because Nadia had asked her to, because Nadia understood, the way her father had understood, that you do not wait for cooperation to begin the process. You begin the process and you offer cooperation as an on-ramp, not as the road itself. Therese's first piece ran at 2:17 that afternoon. The headline was, "Hotel Chain's 22-month occupancy fraud traced to auditor's buried memo, fired, then died waiting for anyone to look." The sub-headline said, "His daughter didn't wait." The Meridian Hospitality Partners acquisition was suspended pending regulatory review. The suspension became a withdrawal 6 weeks later. The Harrogate was placed under interim management by its ownership group, who cooperated in full and were not named in the subsequent enforcement action. The enforcement action named Consolidated Audit Services and two of its senior partners, who had received the memo from Marcus Osei and made a specific decision about what to do with it. That decision had a price. The price took a long time to calculate, but it was calculated. Vincent Callow resigned in lieu of termination 8 days after the story ran. He reached a civil settlement with the Department of Labor 4 months later. The terms were not public. Gerald, the loading dock attendant, was called as a witness in the civil proceeding. He told the truth about what he saw on both mornings. He apologized, while he was telling it, for not saying anything the first time. The investigator taking his statement said, "You're saying it now." Gerald said, "Yes, ma'am." The investigator said, "That counts." Consolidated Audit Services termination records for Marcus Osei were corrected. The corrected file used the language-protected whistleblower disclosure, non-retaliatory separation not warranted, in language drafted by the Department of Labor's own enforcement division. A copy was sent to Nadia's apartment by certified mail. She signed for it on a Tuesday morning in her uniform, before her shift. She stood in the hallway of her building with the envelope in her hands for a long time. Then she went inside. She put it on the kitchen table. She looked at the shelf, the photograph, the letter, the coin. She called her aunt. Her aunt picked up immediately and said, "Baby." Nadia said, "It came." Her aunt said, "Oh, baby." Neither of them said anything for a little while. Nadia's aunt said, "He would be so proud of you." Nadia said, "I know." She said, "He taught me everything I used." Her aunt said, "I know he did." The Department of Labor opened a secondary review of Marcus Osei's death 4 months after the enforcement action. The review was not an investigation into foul play, which is a line I want to be careful with here, because I do not have documentation of what it was not, only of what it was. What it was a review of the timeline. The timeline included the memo, the termination, the 6 months between termination and the cardiac event, the studio apartment in Queens, the morning of 2 o'clock afternoon, the closed report. The review is ongoing as of this recording. I am not going to tell you what to make of that. I think you already know what to make of that. Marcus Osei's name was added to Consolidated Audit Services' official internal registry of protected disclosures. His work on the Harrogate audit was reinstated in the firm's records as complete and substantiated. 3 months after the enforcement action, an anonymous donor established a scholarship at John Jay College of Criminal Justice. The scholarship was for first-generation students pursuing forensic accounting and labor rights law. It was named the Marcus Osei Memorial Award for accuracy. The librarian at the Midtown branch who had helped Nadia access the public terminals over 11 months of Wednesday afternoons was asked to serve as a community reviewer for the scholarship's selection committee. When a reporter asked her why she agreed, she said, "A woman came to my branch with a green folder and very careful questions. She never told me what the questions were for. She didn't have to. The questions told me." Gerald was promoted to receiving supervisor at the Harrogate's new interim management structure. His first act was to put a nameplate on the loading dock entrance that had not previously had one. Therese Mallory won a Regional Press Association award for the series she wrote over the following 3 months. At the ceremony, she was asked which moment of reporting stayed with her longest. She said, "There was a morning on a loading dock when I asked a woman if she was okay. She said, 'Ask me at 11. At 11, the documents were filed. At 11:03, I texted her. She sent back 2 words. Therese paused at the podium. She said the 2 words were, 'He's filed, not I won, not it worked, he's filed.' She did the whole thing in her father's name, past tense, like he was the one who filed it, like she was just the one who carried the folder to the right building." Nadia Osei went back to work the next day. Not at the Harrogate, which had terminated her employment on the morning of the enforcement referral, in what the Department of Labor later cited as a retaliatory adverse action for which Nadia received a settlement. She used to pay off the rest of her father's medical bills and keep 6 months of savings in an account she named, in the memo field of the first deposit, emergency fund, Marcus. She went to work at a different place. She is not a housekeeper anymore. I'm not going to tell you where she works now, because she asked me not to, and I respect that. What I will tell you is that the field she is in involves a great deal of documentation, careful questioning, and the specific skill of knowing when the narrative and the truth are telling different stories. She still has the coin. She keeps it in her left breast pocket. On a Thursday morning 6 months after the loading dock, Nadia sat at the kitchen table in the apartment above the Vietnamese restaurant. She had a cup of coffee. She had a fresh sheet of paper. She wrote in her own handwriting, which is small and level, and does not drift at the end of the line. She wrote, "Dad, they filed it, all of it. Your name is in the record now. It says what you did. It says why you did it. Mom's sister came up the week after. We cooked. I wore your coin. I didn't cry until I was alone, which I think you would say was tactically sound. I love you. I'm going to keep going. N." She folded the paper twice. She put it under the coin on the shelf. She finished her coffee. She went to work. The loading dock on East 52nd Street is exactly the same as it was. Same concrete. Same door with the bad hinge that sticks in cold weather. Same clipboard Gerald keeps in his hand more than he uses it. The difference is that when the morning crew comes through now, Gerald says the full name. "Good morning," he says. He says it to everyone. He says it clearly. He has been saying it clearly since a Thursday morning when he watched a woman in a gray uniform hold out a folded piece of paper and not drop it, not once, the whole time it needed to be held. Some mornings are just mornings, and some mornings are the last morning of something that should have ended a long time ago. The trick is knowing which one you're standing in. Nadia Ose knew. Her father had taught her how to tell the difference. He taught her before she ever put on a uniform, before she ever picked up a weapon, before she ever folded a piece of paper and waited for a man who had spent his career in the comfortable assumption that the people he overlooked did not have the patience to outlast him. They had the patience. They just needed the right Tuesday, or in this case, the right Thursday. If this one stayed with you, a quiet like is how you stay with the next one. And if Marcus Ose's careful work mattered to you, your subscribe is how we find the next story waiting in a drawer somewhere, already documented, already true, just waiting for someone to carry it to the right building.